Welcome to the Consequential Actions podcast. Here we ask a simple question of the history and the actions that have shaped our lives.
Did this leave us more free or more governed? Because what we do not know can be used to govern us.
And what we choose to ignore always will.
This past Friday, June 12th, 2026, a single company went public and made one man, on paper, the richest human being who has ever lived. Within hours, a familiar United States senator took to the public square with a proposal. He observed that this new trillionaire pays the same amount into Social Security as a worker earning $184,500 a year. He called this an absurdity. And he offered a remedy. Lift the cap on taxable income and make Social Security solvent for 75 years and expand benefits by $2,400. Now, I want you to notice something about the way the argument is built. It does not say, here is a program we have chosen to fund and here is who we think should pay for it. It says something stronger. It says that the benefit is owed. It is a right of the American people, and that the only question is which wallet the money is extracted from. The senator did not propose the program as a matter of policy. Rather, he defended it as a matter of justice. And most people who heard him nodded, because most Americans now believe that a benefit provided by the government, paid for by the labor of other people, is a right. It is not. And the distinction between what is a right and what is merely a benefit we have voted ourselves is the single most important thing a free people can understand. It is the distinction this entire series was built to recover. So today, before we go any further into the history, we are going to plant the flag exactly here. I am Jeff Kellick, and this is the Consequential Actions podcast. This is episode 1, part B of the series, Self-Evident, The Road to 1776. Our contemporary application episode connecting the historical principles we explored on Saturday to the policy debates and liberty movement of today. On Saturday, we examined the golden thread, the inheritance of liberty passed across more than 2,000 years from Athens to Philadelphia, and the precise concept of natural rights the founders received when they pick that thread up. Today we ask, how does that concept apply to the way we argue about healthcare, education, retirement, and welfare in general in 2026? And what have we lost by forgetting it? So with that, let us begin. This past Saturday, we traced the thread. Today, we examine one strand of it more closely, because everything that follows depends on getting this strand exactly right. When the Declaration names the rights it calls unalienable, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is naming the rights of a very particular kind. They are what philosophers call negative rights. The word negative here is not a criticism. It's a description of a structure. A negative right is a right that obligates everyone else to refrain. Your right to life obligates every other person to refrain from killing you. Your right to liberty obligates every other person to refrain from enslaving you. And your right to property obligates every other person to refrain from taking it. In each case, the duty that your right places on a neighbor is a duty of forbearance. He must leave you alone. Consider what follows from this structure, because it's somewhat remarkable. A negative right costs your neighbor nothing but his restraint. Every person on earth can hold the right to life at the very same moment, and no one's holding of it diminishes anyone else's. My right to live does not consume your time, My right to speak does not drain your bank account. My right to worship as I please does not conscript your labor on Sunday morning. Negative rights can be universal and simultaneous precisely because honoring them requires that we only have to each decline to aggress against one another. They are, in the most literal sense, rights that everyone can have at once. This is the concept Locke gave in its plainest English form, and it's worth pausing on where he grounded it. In the second treatise of government, Locke argued that man owns himself, his own person, his own life, and that from this self-ownership flows his ownership of his labor. When a man mixes his labor with the unowned things of the world, when he clears a field or fells a tree or draws water, he joins something that is unquestionably his own, his effort, to something that belonged to no one else. And the result becomes his property. Property on this account is not a gift the government hands down. It is the natural extension of a man's ownership of himself into the world he works upon. Your property is the manifestation of your applied time and talents. Your past effort, your history made tangible. It is your life in a form you can hold. I want to be thorough here because this series will always present the strongest version of every argument, including the arguments against my own positions. Locke himself did not treat property as limitless. He attached a condition which scholars call the Lockean proviso. A man may appropriate from the common store of the world only where there is, in Locke's phrase, enough and as good left for others. The right to property, even in its founding formulation, came with a principal boundary built into it. I raise this not to undermine the right, but to show that it was never a brute axiom. It was a reasoned conclusion with reasoned limits. Now, we'll return to this proviso and its modern interpreters in a later article. But for now, hold on to the core. Your property is the worldly form of your labor, and your labor is the worldly form of your life. You have traded your time and talents to receive that property. It is a manifestation of that time and talents, your life in exchange for that property. At least a portion of your life in exchange for that property. Now, with that said, we can state the distinction this whole episode turns on. A negative right obligates others to refrain. A positive entitlement obligates others to provide. These are not two flavors of the same thing. They are opposites in moral structure. If I have a right that you must refrain from killing me, you discharge your entire duty by doing nothing, by simply not acting against me. But if I claim a right that you must provide me with health care, you cannot discharge that duty by doing nothing. You can only discharge it by acting, by laboring, by surrendering goods, by handing over a portion of your life, whether you consented to it or not. The first kind of right asks the world to leave you alone. The second kind of right reaches into someone else and compels him to serve. Then here's the catastrophe of the modern political language. We use the same word, right, for both. We have taken a word that meant a shield against aggression, and we have stretched it to mean a claim upon other people's labor. The word did not change because we discovered some new truth. It changed because the older, harder meaning was inconvenient, and the softer meaning let us demand things while sounding as though they were merely defending principles. And that is the confusion. Now let us test it against arguably the toughest conundrum in American life. I could make this argument easy on myself. I could pick a program that almost no one defends with passion, some obscure subsidy, some boutique grant, and walk it through the distinction and declare victory. That would be cowardice dressed as analysis. This series has a standard, and we take on the strongest version of what we are criticizing, so I'm going to take on the hardest case I can find. I'm going to take on the third rail of politics. I'm going to take on Social Security. Social Security is the hardest case for three reasons. It is enormously popular across every party and every age. Its recipients do not experience it as a charity. They experience it as something they earned. And unlike most government benefits, the people receiving it can say with complete sincerity 4 words that feel like an unanswerable argument. I paid into it. Let us take those 4 words seriously because they deserve to be taken seriously. When you look at a paycheck, you see the line FICA, money withheld every 2 weeks for decades. By the time a worker reaches retirement, he has watched an enormous sum leave his hands under that heading. And he has been told his entire working life that this money was his contribution building towards his benefit. Of course, he believes he has a property right in it. Everything about the way the program is described was designed to make him believe exactly that. The language of the program borrows the vocabulary of a pension, an annuity, an account. It speaks of contributions and earned benefits and a trust fund. It is built rhetorically to feel like savings. So let us ask the question, is it? When you pay your FICA taxes, are you buying into a property right of a future benefit? Something the government owes you the way a bank owes you the balance in your account? The Supreme Court of the United States has answered this question, and the answer is no. The case is Flemming versus Nestor, decided in 1960. Ephraim Nestor was a man who had paid into Social Security for roughly 19 years. He had retired. He was receiving his benefits. And then Congress passed a law providing that certain deported persons would lose those benefits. Nestor was deported under that, and his benefits were terminated. He sued. His argument was the 4 words, I paid into it. He claimed that his contributions had purchased a contractual right, a property right, that Congress could not simply take away. The court ruled against him. It held that a worker who pays Social Security taxes acquires no contractual right and no accrued property rights to benefits. The court pointed to a provision Congress had written into the original 1935 Act, a provision titled, with striking candor, Reservation of Power, in which Congress reserved to itself the right to alter, amend, or repeal any provision of the Act at any time. Your benefits, the court explained, cannot be compared to an annuity bought with premium payments. They are not property you have purchased. They are a promise a legislature has made, and a promise the same legislature may revise or revoke whenever it chooses. Consider what that means. The thing that feels most like your property, the money taken from your own paycheck across a lifetime of work, buys you no enforceable claim at all. What you have is not a right. What you have is the continued goodwill of whatever Congress happens to be sitting when the check comes due. And this is not a dusty point of 1960 doctrine. It is alive right now. In this month's headlines, on June 9, 2026, the Social Security trustees released their annual report. The Retirement Trust Fund, the OASI Fund, is now projected to deplete in the last quarter of 2032. After that, incoming payroll taxes will cover only 78% of scheduled benefits. That is a benefit cut of roughly 22% written into current law, arriving in a little over 6 years unless Congress acts. The 75-year shortfall is now estimated at around $30 trillion. Here's the irony that ties this whole thing together. The depletion date actually moved earlier this year, in part because a new tax law passed in 2025 reduced the revenue flowing into the fund. One Congress gives, the next Congress taketh away. And the program's solvency rises and falls with each session, exactly as Flemming versus Nestor said it would, because there was never a property right there to protect it. Congress giveth and Congress taketh away, because what Congress created was never your possession in the first place. Now we can see Senator Sanders' proposal for what it is. When the trust fund is heading toward a cliff and a senator promises to make it solvent for 75 years by lifting the cap, he is not protecting your property. There is no property to protect. He is proposing to take more from one group of people in order to keep a promise the government made to another group of people, most of whom the government has taken property from in the past to pay a whole other group of people. That may or may not be wise policy. Some say it's akin to multi-level marketing or a Ponzi scheme. But notice the sleight of hand in calling it a right. The benefit is described as an earned right belonging to the recipient. The funding is described as merely asking the wealthy to pay their fair share. Both halves of that sentence are doing work to hide the same fact, that the money must first be taken by force of law from people who have earned it, in order then to be given to people who did not earn it from them. Now, they may have earned it, but that money was given to somebody else back a long time ago. I know it can be kind of convoluted and confusing, but look at it through that lens. Look at it through the Supreme Court's own language. It is not a property claim. It is simply a tax that pays out to other individuals. Note also, many will describe the tax as merely a mechanism for the government to save your own money for you, while also demanding higher earners like Musk pay more. Now, if you're doing this, if you're paying into this for your own retirement because the government knows better, are those advocates for this policy trying to claim that Mr. Musk also needs protected or saved by the government to have his own retirement funded by this policy? I mean, when looking at it through that lens, then I agree with Senator Sanders. The premise is absurd. So no, the FICA tax on your paycheck is not a contribution to a pension fund. It is not an investment in one's own personal future. It is simply another tax. Line item to fund a program ostensibly for a subset of people meeting certain requirements identified by a government that retains a provision allowing them to change those requirements at any time. While also fully aware that there is no such thing as a Social Security lockbox. No segregation of those inflows from FICA directly to Social Security. Rather, those funds coming in become fungible with and connected to all the other taxes and inflows to balance against all the outflows. I say balance in jest because in reality, the outflows habitually outpace the inflows. This creates what we call annual budget deficits. We're now charting about $2 trillion a year, by the way, in annual budget deficits. That deficit is what gets added on to the overall debt. Meaning the government year over year takes in record level taxes and fees from the people, and yet year over year continues to spend more than they take in. But I digress For the purposes of this episode, let's step aside from the Social Security case now and focus back to the idea of negative rights. That these are rights that require nothing from others. Now, I need to be transparent and fair to the other side here because there is a serious objection to this point, and a flippant libertarian may breeze right past it. The objection goes like this. You libertarians love to say that negative rights are free and positive rights are costly. That a right to be left alone demands nothing of others, while a right to be provided for demands their labor. But that is a fairy tale. Your precious negative rights are not free at all. Your right to property requires courts to adjudicate it, police to defend it, a recording office to register the deed, an army to repel the invader who would seize the whole country. Every one of those costs money. Every one of them is funded by taxation taken from your neighbor. So you have already conceded the principle. You already make your neighbor pay to secure your rights. The advocate of nationalized retirement or healthcare or education is simply drawing the line in a different place than you do. You are not defending a different kind of right. You are haggling over the price. That is the strongest argument against the distinction I am drawing, and it has serious defenders. The legal scholars Stephen Holmes and Cass Sunstein made exactly this case in a well-known book titled The Cost of Rights, whose subtitle says a thesis in 5 words: Why Liberty Depends on Taxes. It is a real argument, and it deserves a real answer, not a dismissal. Here is the answer. The objection succeeds only if the distinction between negative and positive rights rests on the word free, on the claim that one costs money and the other does not. But that was never where the distinction rests. Watch closely because this is the crux of the episode. The distinction does not rest on whether enforcement costs money. It rests on the inherent content of the duty that your right imposes on another human being. A negative right imposes on others a duty to refrain. The enforcement apparatus, the court, the police officer, the deed registry, exists for one purpose: to punish and deter the people who violate that duty of non-interference. The court does not exist to compel any private person to serve you. It exists to stop people from aggressing against you. Yes, that apparatus has costs, and reasonable people can argue about how even those costs should be borne. But the right itself still asks of your neighbor only this: leave him alone. The courthouse is the instrument for enforcing a duty of forbearance. A positive entitlement imposes something categorically different. It imposes on a particular person a duty to perform, to render the service, to surrender the goods, to supply the labor. The doctor compelled to treat, the earner compelled to fund, the builder compelled to house. The duty here is not forbearance, the duty is service. And that is the line. It was never free versus costly. It was always duty to leave alone versus duty to serve. Once you see that, the courthouse objection evaporates. The court that enforces my property rights is enforcing your duty to refrain from taking my property. It is not a positive claim upon your labor. It is the organized defense of a negative right. Holmes and Sunstein are correct that it costs money, and wrong that it collapses this distinction. Because the distinction was never about the money. It was about whether your right reaches into another person and commands him to act. This is precisely the question that most rigorous thinkers in the liberty tradition have pressed all the way to its foundation. If the legitimate work of the state is defense of negative rights, courts, police, protection against invasion, then a natural and uncomfortable question arises. Must those things be provided by a coercive monopoly funded through compulsory taxation? Or could, even they, in principle, be supplied through voluntary means? a book you may want to read someday on that topic. That's Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the Guide That Failed. I will also mention that the economist Robert Murphy takes up exactly this question in his book, Chaos Theory. 2 essays on market anarchy, where he argues in essays on private law and private defense that the very services we're most certain require a state, the adjudication of disputes and the protection of person and property, could emerge from voluntary institutions rather than compulsory ones. Now, I'm not going to use this episode to try and resolve that question today. And as a listener, you do not have to follow the argument all the way to its most radical conclusion to grasp the point that matters for us now. The point is the direction the logic runs. Once you take seriously that rights are claims to be left alone rather than claims upon other people's labor, you are pushed step by step toward minimizing the coercion in the system rather than expanding it. That is the opposite of the direction our politics has traveled over the past century. Now, I'll leave Murphy's book and I'll leave Hans Hermann Hoppe's book in the recommended reading in the end credits for those who want to follow the thread all the way down. But let me say this thing, and I think it's the most important thing in the entire episode, because it's the thing that separates a serious argument from a heartless one. The goods we are talking about are real goods. Health is a real good. It is a good thing. An education is a real good. Security in old age, so that a person who has worked his whole life does not end in terror and want, that is a real good, and a profound one. Wanting your fellow citizens to have these things is not the error. It is not even close to the error. A decent person wants his neighbors fed, healed, taught, and secure. I want those things. You want those things. The error is a confusion of the categories. The error is the move that says, because a thing is good and important and deeply wanted, therefore I have a right to it, a right that obligates other people to provide it, and brands anyone who declines to provide it as a violator of my rights. That move is where the whole thing goes wrong. And notice exactly what it does. It takes a person who has simply declined to give, declined to hand over his labor, his goods, his time, and reclassifies him as the aggressor. It inverts the entire moral structure the founders inherited. In the inherited framework, the aggressor is the one who reaches into another person and takes. In the inverted framework, the aggressor is the one who refuses to be taken from. The thief and the victim trade places. And the trade is laundered through the most beautiful word in the political vocabulary: rights. A free people can choose to provide for one another. It can do so through the vast machinery of private charity, mutual aid, fraternal societies, religious institutions, and voluntary association that Americans built and sustained for generations. It can even choose to do so through government, openly and honestly, by saying plainly, this is a transfer. We have voted to tax ourselves and assist one another, and we accept that this is a choice and not a debt owed by nature. What a free people cannot do, not honestly, is launder that choice through the language of natural rights, because that language smuggles in a lie. It says the recipient was owed. The funder was merely paying a debt, and the man who objected was attacking someone else's rights. None of that is true. In a society that cannot tell the truth about what it's doing to whom and for whom will not stay free very long. Let's apply the liberty test to entitlement claim, to the proposition that a government benefit funded by other people's labor is a right. The test we will use throughout this series, as I mentioned before, will ask 2 questions in sequence. First, could an individual morally do this thing to another individual? Picture it concretely. Your neighbor knocks on your door. He's not a wicked man. He has fallen on hard times, or he's growing old, or his child is sick and the medicine is dear. He tells you he needs a portion of your income, 15%, 30%, whatever the figure, and that you must hand it over. And that if you refuse, men will come to take it and cage you for your resistance. Has your neighbor, however sympathetic his need, acted rightly? He has not. We have a word for taking a person's property by threat of force, and the word does not change because the taker is needy or because the cause is good. Could you, the individual, morally do this to another individual? No. Plainly, no. Now, second, if an individual could not morally do this, can a group of individuals, no matter how large, delegate that power to government? That's the heart of the test. And it's the question modern politics is built to make you skip. You cannot delegate a power you do not possess. If you have no right to take your neighbor's property at gunpoint to fund your retirement, then you and I together have no such right. And 1,000 of us have no such right. And 100 million of us casting votes have no such right, because 0 multiplied by any number, however vast, is still 0. The group cannot hand the government an authority that no member of the group ever held. So, if the answer to both questions is no, and it is, then the compulsory funding of an entitlement is an aggression, regardless of what fancy hats its enforcers wear or how large the mob that voted for it. And that's the function of the fancy hats and larger mob, the mnemonic we carry with us through this series. The tax collector wears the costume of legitimate authority, the seal, the title, the official letter. The costume is decorative. It does not change the nature of the act. And democracy adds the second claim, the larger mob, that what no individual may do, a majority may do, so long as it possessed its power through an election. A mob of 10,000 seizing property without authority is called a riot. The same seizure processed through the proper forms is called a program. The forms are real and they make the aggression more orderly and more predictable, which is genuinely important over chaos. But orderly aggression is still aggression. Regular, lawful, well-documented taking is still taking. The procedure organizes the act. It does not transform it. This is what the founders understood, and is what we have forgotten. They inherited a concept of rights as a shield. We have refashioned it into a sword and handed the sword to whomever can assemble the largest mob. And then we dress the whole arrangement in the borrowed dignity of the word that once meant the opposite. So this is why history matters now. Not as antiquarian interest, not as a pageant of old books and dead men. It matters because the founders inherited something precise. And the precision is exactly what we have lost. We did not lose the word. We kept the word. We say rights constantly. We say it more than we ever did. What we lost was the meaning underneath the word, the structural distinction between a claim to be left alone and a claim on another person's life. And a word emptied of its meaning is worse than useless, because it lets us do the very thing the word was invented to forbid, while feeling righteous as we do it. The remedy is not complicated, though it is hard. It is to recover the distinction, to ask every time someone calls a thing a right, does this right ask the world to leave me alone, or does it reach into my neighbor and command him to serve? The first is the inheritance of Athens and Rome and Philadelphia. The second is something else. Something else wearing the inheritance as a costume. On Saturday, we go back to the beginning of this thread, to Athens, where the questions were first asked with rigor. In episode 2, the classical inheritance, we will meet Aristotle and his analysis of constitutions and his idea of the mixed polity that balances the one, the few, and the many. The founders read him, and we will too. I am Jeff Kellick, and this has been episode 1, part B of Self-Evident, The Road to 1776 on the Consequential Actions podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode and want to follow the series, please subscribe to our Substack page at consequentialactions.com. Here you'll find written articles as well as our previous series on the General Welfare Clause, the New Leviathan, and the Empire of Liberty. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Consequential Actions Podcast. Here you'll get video versions of all of our podcast episodes. And of course, follow me on X at jkellick for updates, discussion, and announcements. We continue to post articles and welcome your participation. Until next time, have a great day.